If you were to look at the continually growing and already enormous list of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate characters, you'd see a fair few from long dormant franchises. Many of which are written down on hopeful lists of announcements prior to every big Nintendo Direct, and even brought up at a Cornell University business and marketing lecture. For all of Ultimate's incredible deep pulls from Nintendo's history, there was no love for my second most beloved Nintendo franchise.
Wave Race!
As is with many old Nintendo IPs, Wave Race is of course a franchise that has some big changes over the years. Starting off on the original Game Boy as a top-down racer. However, it didn't really take off until its second iteration on the Nintendo 64, which benefited from being one of the few launch window titles for the young console in 1996. To this day, I still have nostalgic snapshots covered in halcyon days of my first encounter. Walking from my grandmother's home over to a distant family member's around the corner where some cousins were staying for the summer at the shore. There were a handful of us, so we took turns racing each other. For a young me, Twilight City was peak realism. Wave Race isn't just nostalgic for me because it's a game from my childhood, but because it manages to embody such an integral piece of my childhood in a way no other game has. Unfortunately, the franchise has become dormant since its GameCube outing, Wave Race Blue Storm, in 2001. In part because the reception to Blue Storm, while not entirely negative, certainly gives off the impression that it was a step backwards. Before we go diving into all that though, we've got to start with a game which put the series on the map, and why it's seen as a classic of Nintendo's early foray into 3D. For those who might not know, there have long been a subset of development teams within Nintendo with their own names and famous staffs. Wave Race 64 was developed by Nintendo Entertainment Analysis and Development, founded in 1983 as Research and Development 4. This is the group responsible for much of the company's early iconic work, with one of its leads being none other than Shigeru Miyamoto. By the time the N64 was in development, a fair few other big names were helping the charge into the world of 3D, including Wave Race 64's director Shinya Takahashi and programmer Yoshiaki Koizumi, the latter of which apparently helped the Wave Race crew that was largely inexperienced with 3D capitalize on the new technology. At its core, the game was fundamentally designed around its most unique aspect, the water physics, that had apparently been cooked up by an unnamed programmer as a tech demo. Miyamoto was so impressed by it that he began forming a team to create a full game. Returning to a 24-year-old game certainly had me worried I was about to smear a veneer of modern opinion upon something I had held so dear, but turns out Wave Race 64 is still fantastic. In no small part, I think a lot of that has to do with the aesthetics which feel entirely cribbed from, well, a 90s Kawasaki commercial. Which, to be fair, the game certainly is to some degree. This is most easily noticed on the course Sunset Bay, which immediately separates itself from every other track in the franchise with its exaggerated orange tone the water takes on for the eponymous sunset. With silhouetted palm trees in the background, dolphins swimming and leaping beside you, it has an incredible tone. Through it all, the game's mainstays are the colorful four racers and the bright buoys with blinking neon arrows floating above, which is of course boosted by the cheesy synth composition of Kazumi Totaka. So much of the game's smaller elements really help sell the experience. How the engine of a competitor's jet ski mere feet behind you can spur you on and take on a different tone for any given environment is impressive. Then there are these subtle UI elements that are also quite clever. The racer position tracker has several different variations to let you know not only everyone's placement, but if they're hot on the heels of the racer ahead of them, barely hanging onto their watercraft, or have completely fallen off. Which I think speaks to the classic Nintendo quality of highly refined simplicity. What I wasn't expecting upon my return was that I'd get into speedrunning. Long has the practice in general across the medium been interesting to watch for me, but I never particularly cared to participate. There I was, not a week returned, going to speedrun.com, looking at top times around the world and watching a multi-part tutorial on how to master Wave Race 64. It's been incredibly satisfying to spend a night just running a track over and over, trying to perfect the angle of every analog stick movement for every turn. And of course, getting the rhythm of tapping B the entire race at a nice balance of optimal racing and not aggravating my cubital tunnel syndrome. To the benefit of all but the very latter, the community surrounding Wave Race has been both incredibly helpful and endlessly kind. Wave Race 64 is one of the first games that employed a mixture of environment design, music, and atmosphere in such a way that really affected me. I can remember playing each circuit over and over, getting to the final race at Southern Island on the hardest difficulty, where the game beautifully uses the evolving course design. The tide has gone out, the sun is beaming, orcas breach the waves mere feet away, and the terrific Southern Island remix of the title track is in full gear. It's the sort of memory that doesn't just scream childhood to me in a broad sense, but is intrinsically tied to every little detail of the den my brother and I's N64 sat in, as well as what we had for dinner one perfect summer day. And then in 2001 comes the GameCube and Wave Race Blue Storm. In 1998, Nintendo's expansion into the United States took another step forward with the founding of Nintendo Software Technology, a Redmond, Washington-based developer whose prior work included a couple of Game Boy Color titles and a pair of N64 releases. So a new team, a new console, and well, a fair few changes too, most notably the controls. 64's fairly loose and simplistic controls allow players to recover from bad turns or correct their poor approach on any tight angle with relative ease. Meanwhile, Blue Storm is far less forgiving. Even some of the characters with the best handling still control, well, more like a watercraft. Turns not only take more finesse to the control stick, but proper usage of the analog triggers the GameCube controller is known for. All three factors, combined with others we'll get to later, led to complaints by both reviewers and consumers that it either played poorly or was too hard, which feels like a rather shallow critique. While I remember it being harder than 64 as a child, and it still is for a 28-year-old me, it's a completely manageable affair. And if I were a less shameless person, this is where I'd insert a comment about how Demon's Souls is a game that was criticized for being needlessly hard and clunky to control at launch too, but I totally am not going to do that whatsoever. Mediocre jokes aside, I am 100% the weirdo who prefers Blue Storm, though I do love 64 nearly as much. A lot of that has to do with the more nuanced control system, but also the injection of personality. Whereas 64 has 4 characters who wear helmets and don't speak or emote much at all. In Blue Storm, we now have 8 racers from more varied backgrounds, no helmets, more emoting, and the inclusion of a crew chief who will talk to you throughout the race. Because of the lack of helmets, we get some cool little character portraits as the icons for each racer, and some kind of lame little avatars of sorts. They're also super cheesy in a way I like though. For example, my favorite racer as a kid is the British dude named Nigel Carver, and his crew chief is named Terrence, who has the most chip cheerio accent imaginable. Though now I absolutely adore the muscle-headed himbo, Rob Haywood, and his very supportive crew chief, Doug. What truly separates Blue Storm is the improvements to weather, courses adapting mid-race, and the water physics. All of those meld together in some really impressive ways. Unless you go into the settings of 64, the roughness of the water is set, and even then, it kinda doesn't vary that much. No matter what, weather is completely unchangeable for each map. However, Blue Storm randomizes weather conditions when you play any circuit between sunny and cloudy, light showers, rainy, and stormy. With those come a number of different potential wave heights that range from placid 1-foot conditions to intimidating 9-foot seas. There's something special about the momentum of waves. As a kid growing up in southeastern New Jersey, I had the good fortune of spending my summers at the beach. In the time, my brother and I picked up a few hobbies. To name a few, boogie boarding, body surfing, skimboarding, and surfing. We loved the ocean and its raw energy, even if it could be downright terrifying at times. Human strength means little by comparison. Split-second decisions about how to handle the incoming onslaught of Mother Nature are common. Will you get out of the way or attempt to catch it? Those moments where you manage to take advantage of all of its force is a truly special feeling. Wave Race gets that better than any game. It understands that even if you do catch a wave, you're never truly in control. As much fun as it can be to try to shave every fraction of a second off my best times on calm waters, seeing the random weather generator line up a circuit of multi-day storms is a chaotic joy. Looking ahead and knowing if I don't make some crafty maneuvers, a set of 9-foot walls of water are going to push me on the wrong side of a buoy or crashing into the environmental hazards is intense. That dynamicism and the way routes on each track become more varied and harder for each step up in the circuits makes this my go-to pick up and play for 20-ish minutes a night or an everyday sort of thing. Sitting down for a few hours one night with a few beers and just having a constant grin on my face. I know folks also have some issues with the repurposing of maps, but honestly I think that is exaggerated and more so another way Blue Storm is a victim of the style of reviews popular until recent years. That being the consumer focus of giving dry advice on what is worth your money rather than being a critique. Blue Storm at its core is an expansion of the ideas of 64, so naturally reworking familiar grounds is a compelling way to make those distinctions between new and old clear. Looking at Southern Ireland, you can really appreciate the advantages having newer tech affords the environment designers. There's just so much loving detail even below the water and down to the seabed. Or how about Drake Lake as compared to Aspen Lake? While both are thematically coded to be a middle-of-America campground of sorts, just look at how much larger the water space is in Blue Storm. With that extra area not only comes advantages of atmosphere, but allows for more nuance in regards to the power meter. So, for those not in the know, in either game you can have variable max speeds based on how well you stay in between the buoys. In 64 you generally want to pass all buoys correctly, though there are exceptions. In Blue Storm, using the new turbo boost is a smart way to cut corners or power through areas. Nimble driving and performing stunts can quickly gain your max power back as well, so you can see the room there is for experimentation here. Another benefit of Generational Leap is not only more complexity in both designs of the tracks, but also their music. This shines best on the brutal Italian waterway canals of Razza, the only map in the entire game where speedrunners switch from David Mariner to Ryota Hayami for the sake of better handling. Controversially, the cheesy synth rock of 64 is non-existent throughout the entirety of Blue Storm. Instead, we have a much more eclectic spread of music with multiple remixes for each map based on weather condition and one extra for the replay. Razza might be my favorite track of all, other than the spunky mid-aughts summer rock of the title theme. The hypnotic electronica that has this warm vibe feels very Kensuke Ushio, circa Ping Pong the animation. And much like those nostalgic memories of cutting through the waves of Southern Ireland, this is such a powerful, immersive pull. Something I can't quite put my finger on, but a feeling I rarely get from even story-heavy experiences I usually gravitate towards. The Pillows-esque style of Arctic Bay, the thumping electronic bluegrass of Aspen Lake, and onto Southern Ireland's music that can only be described as sad Caribbean cowboy shoegaze. Blue Storm may not have as catchy an OST, but I think it far surpasses its predecessor. Despite the name of this video and everything I've said within, for 15 plus years, I too considered Wave Race little more than a very pleasant nostalgic memory. I certainly loved it, but tucked it away in the distant past. In my endeavor to make 2020 a year of me not having to keep up with all the hot new games for the first time in, well, a very long time, I've afforded myself the ability to go back and revisit so many experiences that came to define my relationship with the medium. Not feeling the need to play the newest big AAA title I'm not that personally into, all for the sake of being a part of the conversation. Because Wave Race 64 and Blue Storm are tremendous games. That which brings me greater joy and makes me think far more than bashing my head against the latest season of Apex Legends for 5 hours a day or jumping into a big bloated cookie cutter open world. That is something I'd encourage everyone to try. To stop playing the big new thing and get back to those old loves. Or try that game you've been meaning to for years. So as always, I really appreciate anyone who's been actually watching these videos to the end here. I know I have an inconsistent schedule, and the tone and subject of my videos kind of has gotten sporadic at this point. But that's because, well, as much as I love anime, I also love video games. And a whole lot of other mediums too. And if you like hearing me talk about those things, I'd really love for you to consider donating to my Patreon. Just $1 a month gets you some access to some bonus posts that I throw up every now and again, as well as a thank you here at the end of the video. And for those who have already given, subscribed, liked, all that good stuff, I say thank you very, very much.